Let's see, got it.
All right. Well, I'm joined by New York State Assemblyman Doug Smith. We're going to talk a bit about his rise in politics, the local and state level of policy making. And first and foremost, you're in the middle of a busy campaign stretch. So I really appreciate your time here, Doug.
So good to be here with you, Chris.
Yeah, so you're first of all serving your constituents in the community that you grew up in, which I love. Politics aside, you and I are Sachem guys that appreciate where we come from on Long Island. But the New York State Assembly is a very specific body of government, state politics. It's a whole nother animal. Can you explain to the average person who may not understand it, your role as a New York State Assemblyman and how that fits into the grand scheme of federal versus local and state?
Well, absolutely. And that's a good question, because I've had people that have known me for years, that have voted for me, that have said, great, we know you do good things, but we actually have no idea what you do. So in the state assembly, there's 150 assembly members. We meet in Albany for in terms of the state legislative session from January through June. And we handle all matters of state policy. So that includes education policy, Department of Motor Vehicles, paving the Long Island Expressway, finally, things of that matter that happen in state government, a lot of health policy, which I think people saw during the pandemic. I don't think they realized how involved in everyday life, in everyday business that state government is. So as a member of the state assembly, as I mentioned, I'm one of 150. My district's about 135,000 people. By the way, that includes about 92,000 in the Sachem community. I have almost the entire Sachem community, so that's a good portion of the district that I represent. And as you mentioned, that's where we both grew up, so it's a great place to be. And for everybody who's watching, move here. It's a great community. But no, yeah, that's definitely, people do ask that all the time of how does that fit in and what is it that you do? My Albany office, of course, in the state capitol and the legislative building next to the state capitol building. And I have an office on Main Street in Holbrook in the heart of the district. So yeah, every day we're just trying to serve the people. And, our attitude kind of is one call does it all. And we refer the person, we refer the problem, not the person. So if somebody calls us and it's a town issue or a federal issue or county issue, we try to just work with other levels of government to fix that.
Yeah, so you talk about kind of a separation of powers between federal and state and local, and you're in the middle of it with the other colleague politicians out there. No matter political party, if there's an issue that needs a solution, you'll work with anybody to make it happen. How much do you find yourself using the state level of policy setting to reflect federal issues, to reflect national issues? I mean, obviously, we're living through a pandemic. There's been issues with social justice. The economy is going up and down, and that's very federal, but it's as local as anything too, and it happens right in our own neighborhoods. How are you as a state politician able to affect policy or be a voice when it comes to federal and national issues?
Well, that's a good point. And right in our community, it's actually split between two members of Congress. So it's kind of interesting that we have such a large, school district and community that we're right on the border. We have two members of Congress. And so I constantly am on the phone and talking with them. Right now, Congressman Lee Zeldin, Congressman Andrew Garbarino. I have a good working relationship with them. Before them, I had a good working relationship with Pete King. And even before that, my predecessor in this office, we worked with Tim Bishop, who's a former congressman, Steve Israel back in the day. So you're right. Regardless of level, Kirsten Gillibrand and Chuck Schumer, as well as the U.S. senators. So we do work with their offices. From time to time, I'll see them, either in Albany or in the city or here on Long Island. And it is good to know that we can work across party lines. And then other issues, may seem federal, but, when, for example, when the Supreme Court takes an action, that actually sometimes results in this year, resulted in the governor calling us for a special session to debate issues related to gun control and issues related to, abortion. So even though those are, federal topics, if you will, people see them on national television. Those types of discussions actually can be had as well at the state level to react or to handle policy like that. And the topic of federalism, my background is as a math teacher. So everybody assumes when they hear that I was a teacher that you must have been social studies. And while I love the topic of social studies, that wasn't my background. But federalism is something that actually really interests me. And you're right. And there's different policies on that because, people think, the federal government, then you have state government, then you have, in our case, county and town government. But really, the federal government and the state government are actually different because, the state government is not necessarily, and this is, it goes to philosophy as well, but state government is kind of running parallel in some regards to federal government. So, they don't necessarily override us per se. We actually just handle different topics. So if it's not mentioned in the Constitution, the 10th Amendment says those issues are reserved to the states and the people. So issues like, people think of the interstate highway system, 495, which is the Long Island Expressway. Even though it's part of an interstate system, it's maintained by the state government. So a lot of these things are passed through the states. Education policy, yeah, there's definitely a federal Department of Education, but it's not educating students. Students are educated at the local school districts through state government, but the funding passes through the states. And that came in a few years back with Common Core, Race to the Top. That was a program that New York State was able to get $700 million. And as a result of that, and this is where the federalism kind of bleeds through. Some people call it, I think, marble cake federalism, where it's like a marble cake where it kind of meshes together, where you have federal policy being set at the state level because of funding and things of that nature. So it really is something that interests me, but there is a blend, and I do like to work with people of all levels of government, but there's definitely a crossover.
And you're on the education committee. You've obviously said the education word a lot. We'll probably talk about Common Core and some of the policy there. You're on the higher education committee, energy, aging, and housing. So many different areas that affect many, many people. There are ways to get the policies that you want to get passed, the legislation that you'd like to get passed. There's ways to do that in an effective manner, but it's a very arduous process. It doesn't matter what level of government. There is a policy process that essentially it's called the stages model of policy process: agenda setting, alternative selection, enactment, implementation, evaluation, issue emergence, very specific, a political science structure on how this policy can be enacted. You live that, and your colleagues live that. And the average person that may get their news from social media or regular news outlets, they don't see the work that goes in behind the scenes. They get riled up about specific issues, yet it's a lot of work when you're a policymaker. Can you give some insight into, and maybe you can share specific examples that you've had pass, or even maybe have not had pass, where you're like, okay, this is my plan. This is how we're going to get the message out there. This is how we're going to get a large amount of people interested and informed, and then how we're hopefully going to get it passed in your favor. Talk about that process of policymaking.
Well, that's actually where the rubber meets the road. So if you want to get something accomplished, there's a question: how do you get to that point? And there's many ways to do it. I'll give you a perfect example. A few years back, I'm now the ranking member of the Education Committee in Albany. What does that mean? I'm a Republican. The majority of the state assembly are Democrats. So I am working opposite the chair of the committee. So I'm the head minority member of the committee. So I'm the ranking minority member. But a few years back, I was the ranker on the Higher Education Committee. And there was something that we really wanted to do with the issue of SUNY and CUNY. There's a scholarship program that if people die in service to our country while they're in active combat, that they that their family members, be it a spouse, be it children, surviving children, that they'd be able to attend any college tuition free, any state university, city university, or community college tuition free. So this is something that, we looked at it, and the way that it was written was very specific. You'd have to die in combat. But we know that there are people that, whether it be in training accidents or a lot of different ways, while in service to our country, they may lose their life. It may not specifically be at the hands of a foreign agent or something of that nature. So we wanted to expand that scholarship opportunity, because I feel, and I think a lot of the people in our community in the state feel that that if you give your life in service to our country, that it's the least we can do is to give your family members and included, and it's something that's taxpayer funded, free college tuition at SUNY CUNY, or community college tuition, rather room and board included. So that was something that we advanced forward, but unfortunately was defeated in the committee process, and there was a concern about the budget, where we had actually pointed out that there was ample money in the budget, because as you can imagine, of course, we're not talking about a lot of money. People that are serving our country from New York typically are on the younger side. Not a lot of them are married or have children. So you're talking about a very small subset. And fortunately, with the training and with the support that we have, we don't lose too many in service to our country. So we're talking about a small portion of individuals that would be affected by this program. So, we contended that there was money in the program for this existing scholarship, and just to expand it so that more people could be included really wouldn't, it's something that we should be doing. So it didn't go our way. It was defeated in committee. That ended up causing, and this was it was before the pandemic. I think it was 2019. It was either 2019 or no, it was definitely 2019. This caused a little bit of a media stir, and a little bit of, the public was outraged that they were concerned about different things. So that ended up getting national media attention, which then at the time, then Governor Cuomo ended up enacting it through an executive order, which then the following budget years, now we've included funding, we've included that policy. So for that, obviously that was not what our intention was. The intention was, and Steve Hawley, an assemblyman from, I believe he represents Batavia in upstate New York, he had introduced that bill. He intended for it to be passed through the regular legislative process, but how it ended up getting enacted was administratively, and then subsequently, just because the people were so enraged that would be something that would be defeated. So that's one example. Another quick example, my predecessor in the Assembly in 2011 introduced a bill called the Nurse Loan Repayment Program. And the idea was that nurses that agreed to work in nursing homes and other areas of high need, that they'd get some tuition assistance if they agree to commit to that. And I was very happy to see, now this is 2011 that Al Graff, our previous assemblyman, introduced that bill. Now fast forward to 2022, a very, very similar program was in the state budget this year. So there's different avenues to get there, but it's finally nice to see that program, which had been discussed now 10 years, finally now is seeing some value and seeing implementation. So, and there's a lot of examples, where, not everything is done the cut and dry way of, how a bill, I'm just a bill sitting on Capitol Hill. There's different ways to solve those problems, but you don't always plan for it in that way.
And policymaking, being a politician, it's leadership. It's being vocal. It's being a voice of the people, your constituents, to serve for them, whether they have the same political ideology or not. Can you talk about, in your eyes, an estimation, the traits needed to be a policymaker, leader, to be a political leader? What are your leadership philosophies and how you try to be the best leader that you can?
Well, okay, so that's something that I don't think I've been asked maybe ever. So that's a great question.
All right, perfect. Let's go.
So I think that when you look at the role in something that I do, and even it can go to your town supervisor, your congressman, member of the state senate or assembly. I think there's different aspects of the job, right? I think that there is, the legislative aspect. So I act as a legislator. I also have a ceremonial role. You'll see us around town cutting ribbons to welcome new businesses. You also see a state role. So I see myself as the representative of the community first. And I've said this for years, like, I don't see myself as Albany's representative to, Ronkonkoma and Holbrook and Farmingville in the community. I see myself as somebody who takes every collective voice and goes up to the state capitol and advocates. So I work for you and the people of our community. I don't work for Albany, coming down here telling people how it's going to be. But I do think that in these roles, the ceremonial role, the official role as a legislator, but also as a community leader as well, I think the qualities you need, I think you need to be able to listen. I think that what I look for when I go to the polls and vote for someone, I want somebody who I feel is authentic, who I feel actually cares. Now, again, there's different philosophies, of course, because, and I go back and forth with this all the time, do the intentions matter? I like to have people with good intentions that are also good people, if you can, but sometimes you'll see when, people come up and ask for your vote, you'll oftentimes hear, wow, I feel like I was just trying to be sold something, like a used car. And, sometimes you sit there and you say, well, if somebody's intentions are maybe not the purest, but they still are doing good things, does that cheapen it? And so I don't know, in terms of quality, I think that, what I try to do is I try to be the same person talking to you, talking to people out in the community. I go on the radio every week and we take live phone calls on LI News Radio from 1 to 2 on Thursdays. Quick little plug. And I enjoy that. And people say you're out of your mind to take live calls on radio because people can ask anything and it's live radio. But the fact is, and of course, my background as a teacher, when I was in the classroom, I'm like, well, there's nothing, people are amateurs compared to the students. Chris, like when you speak to students, they will ask you every question under the sun, no boundaries, no holds bar. So in terms of qualities, I think you have to be real. I think you have to be open and listen. And I think that setting realistic expectations as well. I think everyone tries to under promise and over deliver, but everybody you see running for office, they come up there and they say, I'm going to change the world. And it's great to have that attitude. But you also at some point have to realize there's things you can do and things you can't do. And then the things you can do, how do you get them accomplished? And it's not always going to be, passing a new law or, sometimes you can apply pressure. Sometimes you can, a lot of times nonprofits in the private sector can actually help out and solve a problem. And I'm always amazed when there's a community member in need, when we reach out to the community and ask for that. A lot of times, like for example, at Michael Murphy Park at Lake Ronkonkoma, an unfortunate situation happened that we now know. I think it was a 14-year-old kid who smashed this beautiful memorial. And, for those who know Michael Murphy, who, gave his life for our country, the first thing I did as soon as I found out, everyone was devastated. We put it out on social media. We put it out there. And I had about 3 or 4 small business owners in Ronkonkoma immediately ask, where do we send the check? We want to buy a new one and restore this like today if we can. And you had that outpouring of support. So now at the same time, the then Governor Andrew Cuomo, he had heard word several hours later, and he put out that the state's going to pay for it. The town of Brookhaven put out that the town was going to pay for it. So it was like a race to which, and okay, I can appreciate that on behalf of the taxpayers, these levels of government are going to pay and assist this. I completely appreciate that. But seeing the fact that local business wanted to do the right thing. Now, at the end of the day, ultimately what happened, the original company that engraved the stone, they engraved another one at no cost. They donated. It was bigger and better, more beautiful. And then all the local business owners wrote their checks to a foundation in honor of Michael Murphy. So, really at the end of the day, something, and it by the way, it turned out not to be an intentional act. It was some kids being kind of ridiculous. So that was good as well. It wasn't something, where, so it is, those are some qualities.
Has anybody specifically inspired you or mentored you as, these leadership traits of honesty, integrity, transparency, communication? Did you get that from Al Graff, your predecessor? Is this your parents? Is it people at Sachem? Where did you build your guts as a leader?
I would say probably all the above. I did have the fortunate opportunity to work under and with our previous Assemblyman, Al Graff. He's like a second dad to me. But my own mom and dad, obviously, they always tried to instill that. They bought the most affordable home they could find in what they felt was the best school district. So that's why I ended up attending Sachem, and so proud for it. Yep. We bleed black and gold and a little red now that, so I think that's helpful. The other thing too, is I've always felt like this community has always had my back, and always, just as a young person, given so much. So you do want to give back. And I think a lot of people that we went to school with and a lot of people in our community, they do feel that they've been fortunate in some way. And it might not be monetary. It might not be, it might be, I just think, I'm really the first person in my family to go to college. So like, that was a step, that was something that really, I had an opportunity to do that. And I have a 4-year-old daughter now, and she's actually attending the same elementary school I went to. So I'm pretty excited. She's in the pre-K program now, and hopefully she'll be graduating from Sachem North or East, who knows, in 12 years maybe that'll be reconfigured, but she's loving it. She's in full day of pre-K, but I've always felt good about this community. It's unique, and in my assembly district I represent Sachem, Middle Country, Connecticut, and a little piece of Patrick Medford as well. And these communities all really share this hardworking ethic, this middle class, very middle class. No one's really rich. No one's, really got advantages. It's really blue collar, white collar, and just people working together. And it's also a pretty new community if you consider the fact that the population exploded from the 70s to present. So you don't have a lot of, people saying, well, we've been here for like 10 generations. Really not. You might have 3 generations, if that. Now my daughter's going to be a second generation, Sachem person. So it's I think that's an added element where we are kind of building the center here of Long Island. We're kind of building our own community over the last 50 years, and it's exciting, and I'm so happy to be part of it, because out of the last 50 years, I'm 32, so hopefully I'll be here another 50 years.
Right. And it is, our community is evolving before our eyes. And it's almost like mini generations or mini eras. And Sachem as a school district is only from 1955 to present day. And that can even be dissected to 55 to about late 70s, early 80s. It was growing. 80s, 90s explosion. 2000s, it has split. It got so big, and everything is kind of still figuring itself out. But at the core have been dedicated educators with immense opportunity for students like you and I, and like our children, and my children too will go to the same schools that I went to, including Sachem North. And that has helped define who I am. And I know it has defined a piece of you as well. And I'm forever grateful for those teachers, for the Jim Nolans, for the Isaac Ramaswamis, for the Tom Brischlers, and I can go on and on and on for the people who made a positive impact. Was there a specific teacher, educator, club activity that really helped change your outlook? Did any of that inspire you to go into politics?
I mean, I was in high school. I was a tech geek, big time. We had some people call it like the AV squad, but it wasn't quite that. We had a video production club. We did a TV show that we did a few episodes on, like Channel 18, the cable public access channel. And then I regret not getting more involved in the radio program, because I think that would have been, I really enjoy that to this day. But people that, really inspired me, Frank DeMeo, he was my 8th grade math teacher. He's now one of my constituents. He inspired me to go to college to become a math teacher. When I saw him, he must have been in one of his first years teaching. He really was an inspiration. At the high school level, there were so many great teachers. Mr. Boyle, who was my English teacher, he was great. Just so many. Mr. Miller was my math teacher. He taught us, calculus. I was really touched when, after I got elected, he wrote me a really nice email, and he said, I'm not sure if you remember me. And it's funny because, we do, of course we remember our teachers. You wonder if they remember us, because, you touch so many lives. I think that, everybody, Jim Nolan, you mentioned Jim Nolan. I am a big Jim Nolan fan. He's just gave so much to the Sachem School District, and just his just positive outlook and his, good works. And I remember being a high school student, and he was our principal at the time, and just running into his office, and I'd be excited about something. I'd be like, "Oh, Mr. Nolan, you have to see this." And he, he never brushed me off. He never said, "Get back to class." He would always take the time and take a look at it. And and then after him, John Dolan, who I now work with, he's the superintendent of East Islip. He was with us. I wish he was with us in Sachem a little bit longer, but he was somebody that, even though I didn't have him when I was a student, but when I was doing student teaching and subbing and stuff like that, he was at the helm at the school, and I thought he was a good leader. And I think the students that were in the high school at that time really appreciated him. Kind of, he used to walk around the halls with a broom, and everyone would kind of laugh at that, but
right.
He would, exemplify that from the principal down to every single person in the building, we should all care about certain things. We should care about living in a clean environment and just caring about that. So, and I always felt that with Sachem, and now I go back. I was just at Sachem North the other day for the 9/11 ceremony, very touching, and I still feel the love that our hallways have. And Grundy Elementary School, as I mentioned, my daughter is now attending there. Mr. Lapani, the principal there, I didn't know him obviously when I was a student or anything like that, but it's he seems like a really good inspiration for at the elementary level, having a male teacher or administrator. You don't have too many male teachers or administrators. So there are children that don't have, may not have that positive male influence in their life. So it is nice that that kids get to experience that. At the high school level, you have probably evenly split male and female teachers and coaches, but at the elementary level, you don't see a lot of that. So I've heard that from within the community that that a lot of young boys really appreciate having somebody they can look up to at a young age. So it's good. And I think that, as somebody who's like an elected official for the area, and, I think that you try to be a good role model also. Like you try to, for whoever's watching, and it might be no one, but I think it's a few people are taking a look at what we do. You try to do that.
On the political side again, very difficult to be a Republican politician in a very Democratic state, but you fight on, you still push through, and you still get many things passed that you need to for the sake of the people. Can you describe the tension, the political tension that becomes part of agenda setting, that becomes part of what you see in news, especially on the national level? There's so much infighting in politics, but at the state level, how do you handle being on one side of the political spectrum and having to fight for your arguments and your constituents with people who have a total opposite perspective? How does that play out? Does that get frustrating? And now that also the governor's seat is up for a re-election, that's an interesting time where there's a lot of things thrown out there for people to consider. You're a voice in that process, let alone fighting for your own seat. Talk about that whole sort of world of political parties and agenda setting.
Yeah, so that's something, that's the side that a lot of people don't get to see, publicly. They don't really see that, but and they have maybe some assumptions and some thoughts on that. But right, I'm a Republican in the state legislature that is now both houses are now have a Democrat majority. So that has made things a little bit more interesting. When I was first elected, the state Senate, which has 63 seats, had a very slim Republican majority. It was 32 seats to 31. In the state assembly, we've been roughly the same. We're about 107 Democrats to 43 Republicans. And it's not only, so what makes this interesting, it's also a regional difference too, because you look at Democrat, Republican, it's not, when you look at New York, Long Island has 22 assembly members, Suffolk and Nassau County. And then you have New York City has, I believe, about 68, 69. And then upstate New York has the rest. So, and of course we call it upstate, but it's, it's really different. The capital region near Albany, then you have Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse. So it's a very diverse state. Nothing's quite like the city, nothing's quite like Long Island. So I think when it comes to agenda setting and getting policies done, you do have to work across party lines. I have a little plaque on my desk that says, it's amazing what you can get done if you don't care who gets the credit. Because that's just the attitude you have to have. And at the end of the day, if I have a bill that's really good, unfortunately, not fortunately or unfortunately, I really don't care, but I can hand that bill off to my colleagues if that's necessary, because a good idea is still a good idea, whether it's a Republican or Democrat idea. So that's the type of thing that we've done. It was, I will say it was different when you had a different majority in each house. I think even a lot of my Democratic colleagues would agree that they liked it a little bit better, because on some regards, they knew that, you knew on both sides you weren't going to get what you wanted entirely, but you get a compromise. And I feel that divided government, I feel like, can give you a compromise. You're not going to have one extreme or the other. You're going to have something that's maybe, I don't want to say more well thought out, but definitely more time spent doing it. So I think that's something that 2019 that shifted. So I think you've seen a lot of broad policies enacted that hadn't been, and some I support, some of them I'm very concerned about. Obviously right now, very controversial is the bail reform law. That's something that had passed the assembly every year in some fashion, but had never become law. It finally became law in 2019. But you also had, and I think a lot of people in our community are rightfully concerned about that. I'm definitely concerned. I voted against that. But then you had other policies that seemed to take a long time to enact. I like the idea of early voting. You've had early voting in red states like Texas for years. So it's not really a Democrat or Republican issue, but it hadn't been addressed. So I generally like that. And by the way, it's not without fault, because you have in an odd election year, you have 10 days of early voting and no one will show up. But then you have the presidential election where, everyone's there. There were lines for 2 hours at early voting sites. So it really is, it's feast or famine. So it's going to be up to, I think, the boards of election to decide how they figure out how many sites to have, what hours to have. I was very shocked because the first year and I supported early voting. I went to vote in 2019. Sean, who works with me, that I think a lot of people in the Sachem community know. Sean Himes, great guy. He and I went to the polls. We were the first and second voters, the first early voting at Brookhaven Town Hall on the first day, and maybe there were 12 people there. Then you fast forward a year later, and I'm on the radio every week. So I said, everybody who wants to vote early, join me at Brookhaven Town Hall at 10 a.m. on Saturday, you know, et cetera, et cetera. I get there, you know, and I figured, 10 a.m. I get there about 10:15. There's a line. So Brookhaven Town Hall, a line within the building, out the door of the building, down through the entire parking lot, down the hill onto, I guess, Granny Road, or the road that's right there. Unbelievable. People had chairs. It was very interesting. And of course, I'm like, I just didn't have time to do that, you know, so I figured I'd vote on election day, but I did take a time to go up and down the line. And I talked to some people to just to get their feeling. I said, "Hi, I'm your local assemblyman." Now, I'm not campaigning, although I was on the ballot at that time. And by the way, I did get mixed reviews. Some people are like, "Oh, we love you." Some people are like, "You know, we don't like you." So, so you do get that. Yeah, there were one or two that are like, "I know who you are. I'm not voting for you." And I'm like, "Okay, that's okay."
It's a rough business, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. But it's good to see that we have these mixed things. But I think to answer your question, and this is true probably in life and probably in the private business too, is it's about personal relationships. So I go to dinner with my colleagues across the aisle from different parts of the state. I have a great relationship with Democrats and Republicans, and that helps. You know, we go to karaoke every week, you know, occasionally. So there are, you know, people laugh at that, but you imagine Albany's a very cold place and there's not a lot to do there at night. But so you do have opportunities to come together and spend time together. And I would say, you know, we might have a vicious debate on the floor, not vicious in a sense that, you know, it's never personal attacks generally, but debating policy and at the end of the debate, you'll see people look for each other and say, you know, good discussion, and then get dinner, you know. So, and that's the type that I wish the public would see that more. Because, you know, and some people, by the way, some people dislike that and say, "Oh my gosh, you're giving up on your values," but it's not compromising values. I think it's just being human and finding a way, when you have people that are living in a very urban area, people living in a very rural area, we're smack in the middle of suburbia. There's just so many that just don't understand the different lifestyles. You know, I love visiting New York City, but I love knowing I can come home to our area, you know, to be in this suburban community. And rural, I love it, but you know, I would never be a farmer. It's just a type of lifestyle I just would never be able to partake in. So and we have those extremes in the state. So I think that the more time we spend getting to know each other and getting to know the concerns, I think it makes for better policy.
In politics, there's a lot of outside influences. There are interest groups. Obviously, you're very in tune with education. There are unions, there are boards of education. How do you control the influence of those outside organizations, of the interest groups? How much do they play in the policy making that you've been involved with?
Well, so it's interesting because, you know, people think of the word lobbyist. They hear the word lobbyist and think it's a bad word. And it's funny because when you're on the outside, you think about that, but for every different issue, you'll have 2-3 sides of an issue. And, you know, as a legislator, people expect us to be experts on every issue. And, you know, like I said, I know education pretty well. I don't admit to be an expert, and I always reach out. Like, for example, the groups that might be looking to have an input. The School Superintendents Association, I'll call them. The School Boards Association, I'll speak with them. The Teachers Union, and we have a state teachers union. We have our local teachers unions. I'll speak to them as well. The PTA, you know, people forget there's a huge statewide organization led by actually Dana Playton, one of our local folks. So Sachem PTA is very involved with the state PTA organization. But those are definitely, you know, if you're talking about education policy, like those are organizations that definitely have a voice, and they may actually have different opinions on any given issue. You know, the PTA might think one thing, the teachers might think something else, and the school, there's the school business officials have an organization. So, but when I say, you know, lobbyist is not a bad word, because we can't all be experts. Like if there's an environmental policy, I definitely want to hear both sides of it, because you want to make sure you're protecting the environment, but you also want to make sure you're not creating a regulation that's going to be completely unreasonable. I mentioned rural areas before. Again, we have some small farms in my district, very small. If you go further east, you have a lot of farms on the North Fork. But those issues are a lot of times things that, you know, I wouldn't have an expertise in. So I'm counting on the New York Farm Bureau to bring things to our attention. And then I'm counting on, different organizations to kind of let us know. But in terms of like influence, people think of money in politics. So that's always been, how do you combat the issue of money in politics? Because people do, donate money and they do. My attitude, it's tough to say because a solution that's now been presented is publicly matching funds for campaigns. So we're going to see a system. I don't think it's going to be the silver bullet that people think it might be, where now you're going to have taxpayer funded elections where, in the interest of getting rid of special interest money, let's say Verizon, the company Verizon gives a $500 check. Some people might say, oh my gosh, is somebody going to be influenced by that $500 check? I laugh and I say, I don't think so. But to combat that now, individual donations are going to be matched to the tune of a great number. So if somebody donates $50 to me, the taxpayers now under this new system that's coming in for the next cycle, they're going to be matching it 12-1. So that $50 contribution, and this is only for individuals that live in the person's district. Now suddenly that's matched by the taxpayers. I guess on the one hand, it does, if you're worried about dishonest politicians, I guess on the one hand now somebody that's a member, firefighters could, that live in a community, 10 firefighters donating $50 now that gets multiplied out, do have a significant greater impact than, let's say, a corporation that might donate $2,000. Obviously that balance is there. I don't know that that's the answer to actually take money out of politics by putting more money into politics. I'm going to be very interested to see how it goes because maybe I'm a bit cynical, but I do anticipate that in 5 or 6 years, you're going to see somebody's, messing around with the system, putting money in their pocket or doing something they shouldn't. And I'm sure we'll see some arrests and prosecutions, unfortunately, because that's just, I like to believe human nature. I like to believe people are good, but you always do see the outliers where people are doing stuff they shouldn't be. But I don't know. I think the best way the people can get involved is just attend community meetings and call their representatives. I try to attend as many community meetings as I can, civic associations, chambers of commerce, when there's good things going on. I will say one thing, I personally don't attend many school board meetings because it's a separate, and people have said that to me, we don't see you at many school board meetings. And the reason is because it's a separately elected government. So I don't want them to feel ever, and I have, 6 school districts, technically, if you look at the borders of my district, the 4 that I mentioned, and then I have a tiny piece of Central Islip and a tiny piece of 3 Village. But I don't want the school board members to feel that like I'm trying to influence them or trying to tell them what to do or, so I'll only generally come to a school board meeting if I'm invited or if there's something that, good news or to try to kind of take the pressure off, because a lot of people will, go and attack their school board member when they're actually meaning to talk to their state government when we're doing something maybe right or not right. So, I think the best way probably that the average citizen can combat influence in politics is just by getting involved. And, I try to do like one-on-ones with your assemblyman. I actually, a few years ago, I did a mailer that said, come to one-on-one meetings with your assemblyman. I did one at the Sachem Library, one at Connecticut, one at Middle Country. And it was, people knew that they could have attended and we mailed it out to everybody, but one of them, I had 0 people attend. Now, again, I'm sure people saw this. I'm sure they were available, but they said, nothing that I'd really want to bother them with. The Sachem one, I had about 12 people attend. Middle Country, I think we had about 8 people attend. So, my attitude is, I have office hours also in my office. So when people want to meet with me, I'm pretty available. I could do a Zoom meeting now that we have this technology. I could just, if you come in, there's a good chance if you just walk into my office, I may be there. So when I'm not in Albany. So I try to be accessible in that way. And I kind of, I like it when people come in and they have something that they want to add. I think it spices it up.
Yeah, the interaction with the community is the most important part. You get a pulse of it, you sense of it, and we'll wrap up with this. Obviously, we talked. There's been a ton of challenging times in the last couple of years during your most recent, stint, and pandemic, social issues, the governor resigning. It's the economy, the changeover at the national level of government that has impacted so many different points of legislation. What has been your biggest challenge, and how have you overcome that as a policymaker with your leadership ability?
I think there's ongoing challenges. It's tough to say because, you know, we were able to help over 2,000 people get their unemployment insurance. And it's sad. And those are people that directly reached out to us because they weren't getting anywhere with unemployment. So I think that, when everything was shut down during the pandemic, I think that, I immediately went, I was very alarmed at the fact that the Department of Labor was not able to respond to people. So people were not getting some people had no income for 9 or 10 weeks. And that is, obviously very concerning because especially the people in our area, they didn't make the choice to close their place of employment. The government did as a precaution. So, and it's something that I hope that we're never in that dire situation ever again. And, of course, it's easy now. Any of us could sit there and Monday morning quarterback and say what could have been. But I think that, that was a big challenge trying to handle that. And I think my office, especially, I have a really good team. I think they did an exceptional job helping me, handle people's unemployment insurance claims. I'm happy now as we're coming out of the pandemic, we paved the Long Island Expressway. Finally, this was something that I was yelling about for before the pandemic. And actually, we had actually a $55 million paving project that was supposed to start in 2020 on the LIE between exits 55 and then 64, where it then becomes concrete, because people said, why is it only going to 64? It becomes concrete. So I was very excited about that. It would have started, but then the pandemic hit in March and monies were allocated to deal with the pandemic. No paving was taking place. So at the end of that, I was very pessimistic now, 2 years later, that you're sitting there and you're like, are we going to, is this something that we're still going to be able to do? So thankfully with the federal infrastructure money, Congressman Andrew Garbarino, he was very instrumental in that. We were able to now not only pave exit 55 to 64, you see it, and it's just about complete. This is probably the fastest they've ever done a paving project, but the Nassau-Suffolk border to exit 64. So that's a challenge that I'm happy that we were able to meet. I'm working on, Middle Country Road, believe it or not, is one of the most dangerous roads in the state. And our area, it's a little bit to the north of Sachem, but our area between the Smith Haven Mall and North Ocean, it's about a 6-mile stretch. You have multiple accidents a day. You have an injury almost every day, and then you have fatalities every year. And so that's something that I've been working with the state DOT over the last several years. It's not an easy fix because for these types of projects, you have engineering, you have education, and then you have enforcement. They call them the 3 E's. So, obviously we look at what engineering fixes can be made to make the roads safer. So we're working on those. So that, being a deadly stretch of road, that's something that I'm working on. Lake Ronkonkoma is probably, the water quality in the lake. That's something that, and it's related to a lot of things. We don't have sewers in our area. So in the near future, trying to get additional money so that we can put sewer infrastructure in across our district. People don't realize that. Well, they probably do realize, and there's a cost associated with that. But, in order to promote economic development, but also just simply keep our water, which we get from our sole source aquifer beneath us, we want to make sure that's clean. And Lake Ronkonkoma, for people who would love at one time, it's not really a place people are swimming these days. So I'd like to see that become back, and it looks like it could take 8 to 10 years to really clean that up. But it's something that I'm happy to see we're making some progress on. But I think that's got to be a priority. And people hit me all the time and say, "Oh, Doug, can we build like a public pool at the Holbrook Country Club?" I would love to do that, but I would much rather, if we had to choose, because it's still taxpayer money, millions of dollars, I'd rather clean up the water in Lake Ronkonkoma. A lot more people can swim and enjoy a lake, especially our lake. It's a very beautiful lake. And I'm happy, the Lake Ronkonkoma Improvement Group, which is just a group of people that were sick of waiting for the government to do something, back in 2014 assembled, and they just said, you know what, we're going to do it ourselves. We're going to just start cleaning up, and they themselves went through and cleaned up the lake. So, our community, when I look at it, I'm looking at the nuts and bolts things going on around town and saying, okay, how can I, as the state representative, help? And then I look at the policies. And again, I know this is not a campaign, video, but like I do support our law enforcement officers, and I think that our community does too. And I think that's, if you're a Democrat or a Republican, I think people support law enforcement in our community, and I think that they want safer neighborhoods and things of that nature. So those are maybe the more esoteric, the bigger issues we're working on up in Albany, and we're going to continue working on those things. But I always like to see, what's in it for us? Where is, how is our community benefiting? And I'm happy to say that, you know, we have seen policies that have been helpful. The first fight I took on when I got elected in April of 2018, the Smart Schools Bond Act, there was a significant amount of money stuck in Albany for 4 years. 11 million was due to Sachem, was due, you know, to be given to Sachem. And we were actually being held up. We couldn't build the school safety vestibules in every school building to build like a security vestibule and visitor management system, something that every other school had, we didn't. And, you know, and it's something that I was screaming at the top of my lungs. I didn't want to draw attention to the fact that we didn't have these things because I didn't want to advertise that, hey, you know, but I was very happy that within a few short months, I was able to get that 11 million down to Sachem, and now every school building in my district and some of the administrative buildings as well have that secure entry management system. So just little things like that. And I think, you know, regardless, Republican, Democrat, I think that, you know, I think that we are able to deliver the services for the community. And you know what? I'd like more people to get involved and ask questions and help demand these things, because we do have other challenges. And I know we're wrapping up on time, but you know, one recent example, this Midway crossing project that's being proposed smack in the middle of our area at the Ronkonkoma Railroad and MacArthur Airport in the middle. The community got involved. We asked Legislator Anthony Piccirillo and I asked for community meetings to be held. And because the community showed up and voiced their concerns, the project has been significantly scaled down. So things like that, like, and I think that a scaled down project there does make sense. And I think that people in our community are not against development or sensible redevelopment. They just want something that we can live with. You know, we don't want our you know, community to become a city. We just want something that we can live with, and we want good jobs and things of that nature. So I just would ask everybody, get involved, and you don't need a title to make a difference.
You can be a outside influencer as a policymaker by having a loud voice and just being active in your community. That's all it takes. But you have been incredible in this 50 minutes, because I really appreciate your time. I know you got a busy schedule, and, you know, hopefully you enjoyed talking a little leadership and policy analysis, because I did. And good luck in these next couple months leading up to Election Day. And thanks for everything you do for our community.
I appreciate it, Chris. You're the best, and you're my favorite journalist. Don't tell anybody, but it's true. And you know, award-winning and thing. But no, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. I know we went a little bit over, but you know, hopefully that's helpful. And you know, call me anytime.
Awesome, man. Yeah, this is great. And